I always start a painting like this with a simple line drawing, usually done with a brush. The brush saves me time, and so that is a critical thing for me, usually when I'm painting outside. But even if I'm in the studio, the brush saves me some painting time, so I just draw with a brush. I don't need it to be an elaborate drawing. I just want to mark the bigger shapes for myself. And then right after that, I start blocking in. When I block in, what I'm doing is I'm making big poster-like shapes. And I'm just trying to cover the canvas in the first 20 or 30 minutes of the painting. This gives me a base to work the modeling and the details later as I progress. You can see I'm blocking in the foreground shadow. There's a middle ground shadow that I'm going to have for a bunch of seagrass that will be in the painting. And I'm going to bring some of that blue color back into the foreground shadow. Now I'm going to block in the area for the water. It's important for me to get these colors as accurately as possible so I don't have to repaint them later in the painting. I like to work from big shapes to medium shapes to smaller shapes. I start off with flat shapes, and then after I get those in, I start to model those shapes and create forms with them. And then after that, I apply the details and finish up the painting. It's a quick process, usually just a couple of hours. And this was developed from painting a lot outside. But I carry this way of painting into the studio too. I want to keep a consistent approach to the way I make paintings. And so this works for me. And I find that I get the best results doing this. I want my paintings to evoke a sense of place, not necessarily be an exact representation of what nature is. And it depends on my mood, but sometimes that's a little more exaggerated, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's closer to nature. But overall, I'm after a romantic view of my experience, something that gives the viewer enough to make them feel like it could be a real place, but it doesn't have to be an exact copy. That's my goal. You can see these colors are really flat, just big shapes. I am designing the shapes. That's important. Try to get a nice rhythm going with the color and value. And I'm always thinking about how that color is going to work in the totality of the painting. Now I'm putting in the sunlit sand. And once I get this in, I can start to add details on top of the bigger areas. So I'm always working from big shapes to smaller shapes to smaller shapes. And usually I'll try to work from the things I'm the most sure of, color and value wise, to the things I'm least sure of. So if I'm not sure about what a color or value is in a scene, I'll hold that back and develop the rest of the painting around it so that I can more easily understand what I'm looking at. Sometimes your eye gets fooled because there's so much going on and you think a color's lighter or darker or more saturated or less saturated. And so if you're unsure, it helps to do the things you're sure of first. And that way you have more information to compare the things you're unsure of to, and that will help you get a better result. You can see now that I have all these big shapes in. I'm starting to model those shapes into forms. This gives me an opportunity to add variety in the color, but still hold the value. What I'm going for is an overall sense of light in the painting. I want to keep this warm sense of summer light and really have that lit area glow. Now some waves for the water area. The idea is not to change the stuff I've put down, but to paint on top of it. So there's not that much correcting as I go. If I have to adjust something, I usually save that for the end when I can see the whole thing in totality. Designing some breakers for the water. As I go back in space, I modify the whiteness. It's not a pure white. I start with a more yellowish white in the beginning, and as I go back in space, I cool those, adding a little red and then a little violet to it. Now I'm modifying the bottom of that middle patch of seagrass. The bottoms tend to dry out first, so they get a little warmer color and then the tops. And I'm modeling those areas now, getting a sense of volume for that space. Adding some sea foam where the water and the land meet. Some reflections under the breakers, lightening the water in front of them. A little bump by the cat. I have a studio cat, and and she bumped the camera. I was not aware of it while I was painting, saw it in post-production. So at this point, I'm just continuing to refine things, adjusting colors, refining edges, adding smaller and smaller shapes to the forms, and just developing the painting overall. Trying to hold that sense of light, not getting too much contrast in the light areas. I want to keep the light areas all as one area and the shadow area as a separate area, and I don't want those to overlap if I can. So you'll notice that even in the smaller shadow areas in the bigger sunlight, they don't compete with that foreground shadow, which is a lot darker. When I'm using a little brush like this, any brush actually, but especially when I'm using a little brush like this, I try to change how I hold it so I don't get too stiff with it. And I don't want to hold it like a pencil. I want to keep it out so I can really spin it around in my hand and get different angles with it and use the whole brush, the tip, the sides. I can push into the painting. You see, I'll change the position of how I hold that brush quite a bit. At this point, I'm trying to add interest without adding too much detail. I don't want to get too fussy. I want to keep everything fresh and loose and just keep that sense of light. Just refining some edges now. A few little touches to those waves. When I think about those waves, I'm thinking about the reflected light on the surface of the water, the side of the wave, and the top of the wave. Now I'm going to add some clouds into the sky. Start with a yellowish tint to my white, and as I move down towards the horizon, that tint will go through red and alizarin. I'm really trying to design these clouds, thinking about where I'm placing them, how soft or hard they are in relation to the things around them. So I'm going to start adding the sea oats, the seed pods for these grasses, starting in the shadow. Just design the division of spaces between them, trying to get a sense of an organic look to them. Now I'm doing the ones in the sunlight. And again, I want to get a rhythm going across the painting with them. I don't want them equal in size or shape or angle. And so I'm trying to vary all those things as I paint. And you'll see I change the angle of the brush, so I don't get too rhythmic and too similar for everything. I want to keep a nice flowing sense, an organic sort of rhythm to them, not a very structured. Strengthening some of those shadow areas just a little bit, but they still don't compete with that foreground shadow. And now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a greater sense of depth in the painting. Right after I do this, I'm going to add a little bit of grass in the right corner in the sunlight to sort of separate the layers a little more and just give it an extra little sense of depth. Once I get all the rest of this in and I soften this shadow edge here. I want that shadow to have a little feathery edge and broken light because it's coming through those grasses from the right. Now I'm adding these lit grasses in the foreground, and that's going to be it for this painting. A quick little study, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.